Okay.
All right. Well, this is a special episode. For the SIGAP Success Series, for those that are not following, start following because we've got the biggest guest yet. The one and the only Doc, the original Doc Davis, our advisor from 2004 all the way up to 2010, 11, 12.
It was 17 when I finally retired. 2017, yeah.
Oh man, I guess 11 is when I got out. So yeah, that would be. That's where I missed you a little bit.
2017 was when I had my stroke and left the university and kind of had to drop SIGAP.
So you did a full 15 years.
I did. I did.
The advisor.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, well, as you guys can tell, this is going to be the first one that we're going to do live in person. No sharing of screens. Doc's already complained that there's no script for him. So this is going to be a little bit more difficult for him than it is me. Because as you guys know, we just chat and talk. But with SIGAP Success Series, we want to talk about a variety of things. Primarily, let's introduce yourself. I want to give us a brief synopsis of you, how many kids, how many grandkids, where are you living these days?
Okay.
How did I track you down?
Well, I'm splitting my time between Nibley, Utah, and St. George, Utah. When I was down here, we were buying a house, and I was over behind me hooking up the fridge to water and hooking up the washer dryer to water, and I suddenly started to feel funny. And that was on May 22nd, 2017. And I started to feel a little funny and had pain in my flank. And I hadn't had any symptoms. I'd been moving all day. And I said to Kathy, I don't feel really good. And she said, well, go lay down and see if you start feeling better. And I went and laid down and I couldn't feel better. Extreme pain in my flank. And I thought I was having a kidney stone. And so she took me to the emergency room over at Dixie Regional Hospital. And I walked in and told them I thought I was having a kidney stone, and they diagnosed the kidney stone, but it was on the wrong side. It was hurting on my right, and they found a stone on my left. So they sent me home that night, and the next morning I woke up and was still having some pain, but was a little bit confused. And Kathy, my wife, said I was holding my hands up, examining my hands and acting a little strangely. So she decided to take me back to the emergency room, and I stood up to get to the car and I fell. I couldn't stand up. And so they took me to the emergency room, and I had no blood pressure and was in shock. And I don't remember much about that emergency room visit. The second one, I got it. The next thing I knew, I was in the intensive care unit. 3 days later, I woke up, heard the nurse talking, and I said, where am I? And she said, you're at Dixie Regional Hospital in the intensive care unit. And I said, the intensive care unit? What am I doing here? And she said, well, you've had a stroke. And I said, a stroke? Did I have a stroke? I couldn't have had a stroke. And she said, yeah, you've had a stroke. And she said, you're not moving your right hand at all. And I said, I can move my right hand just fine. And she says, that's your left hand. And I said, oh, crap, I couldn't move my right hand. And so that's how I learned that I had a stroke. Spent the next 3 days calling people and telling them that I wouldn't be back to work. This was the weekend. And so I spent the rest of the weekend in the intensive care unit. And on Monday or Tuesday of that week, they transferred me to the post-stroke care unit. And I began my rehab for the next 6 weeks. It turns out that I didn't have a true stroke. I didn't have a clot. I didn't have a bleed. I had what was called a septic embolism. And years ago, in 2002, I'd had a heart valve replacement. And I'd had instructions when I had the heart valve replacement that I always had to have antibiotics when I had dental work to protect the heart valve from getting infected. And I'd had dental work about 2 weeks before my stroke, and I'd taken the antibiotics protectively, and it hadn't worked. And I didn't realize I'd gotten an infected heart valve and had endocarditis. but I knew what endocarditis was, and I knew to take the prophylactic drugs, and I knew all the things, but it just didn't work for me. So unfortunately, I woke up 3 days later and started the rehab and worked my way through rehab. Had to be on antibiotics for 6 weeks for the heart valve. Spent the 6 weeks down here in St. George, and it was so hot that I had no temperature control. One of the things I lost during the stroke was my hypothalamus and the control of temperature. So I was like a lizard. I accepted whatever temperature was presented to me by the environment, and I would just die in the air conditioning, shiver and shake, and then get up and make Kathy take me outside for a walk in the 112-degree temperature here in St. George. So I finally ended up wanting to go back to Logan, and had to go see my doctors up there and tell them what was happening. And so I transferred back to Logan, to where my kids were living, and to be closer to the kids. So that's kind of the story of my stroke. I lost the use of my right hand, the use of my right leg, but I nearly lost my middle finger on my right hand due to the blood clots that spread throughout my body. And but I can do most things. I learned to walk and learned to feed myself and learned to think. And I didn't lose my sense of direction, and I didn't lose my speech. I didn't get slurred speech or have difficulty with speech. But the one thing I did lose is I lost my sense of balance. And so now I walk with a walker, and in order to keep my balance and keep my sense of balance. But I've gone through rehab and developed my strength back so I can sit and stand and walk. I try to walk about 2 miles a day. But that's basically the story of my stroke. The one thing I did develop during my stroke was dyslexia. And it's an adaptive dyslexia. And it is the part of my brain that was affected that controls my being able to read. So I don't reverse letter images. I just can't recognize letter images as letters. I don't put the pieces together as letters. And I noticed that when we were driving between home and hospital and home and rehab center and so forth, I couldn't read the street signs anymore. Simple street signs. There's one that I really struggled with. It was up on the way out of town called Green Springs Drive. And I could never read the word Green Springs. And I'd have to say, what's that word? What's that word? And so I couldn't read. And that's been a loss because I was an avid reader. As you can imagine, I tried to read lots of things, but now I read audiobooks or have audiobooks read to me by my Kindle. I can't read email, but I can have it read to me. And Kathy keeps me up on my correspondence and my emails. The other thing that's really changed is I couldn't write. I can't use my hand. My right hand, I was strongly right-handed, and I can't use my right hand. I can't grip the mouse or click the mouse or anything, but I can use my left hand limitedly. And so I'm able to click the mouse. And then finally, the third thing that really affected me is my vision. I always had type 2 diabetes, and I was controlling it poorly. But I controlled it really well, starting with my stroke. But the stroke wasn't related to the diabetes, and the diabetes wasn't related to the stroke. But the complication is that my diabetes became really hard to control since my stroke. So I've developed secondary blindness and retinal bleeds and hemorrhages. And so I've had to deal with those, been through the lasers, been through the shots in the eye. So I'm a regular recipient of shots in my eye and laser treatments, and trying to adapt to this new lifestyle. But my speech was never affected. My memory was never affected. My medical knowledge is still intact, but I just can't practice medicine anymore because I can't use my right hand to do physical exams and those kinds of things.
And that's the hand, some of you might know, they said, bend over and slap
right.
the glove.
That's right.
Doc's talking, he's being a little bit like that. There's been a lot of hardship on him, and that's true. But during this time, he's actually been able to do something that I don't know if you did prior. You were able to write a book.
Yeah. I had collected notes on my interesting cases, let's say, and my life as an emergency room physician and a family practitioner and a student health physician. And so I had 3 careers, and spanning those 3 careers, I'd basically taken notes on all the interesting cases. And one of my favorite things to do was to get together with my friends and say, so they'd always ask you a question. Usually the question was, so what's the worst case you've ever seen, or the funnest case you've ever seen, or the grossest case you've ever seen? And so I had this collection of stories that I could tell that were about various variety of medical problems that people encountered. And so I did write a book, collected my notes, and wrote the book by dictation, and just dictated the book into my computer. And then Kathy proofread it with me, and I submitted it to an editor, and they accepted it right away, and got it published. For those who are interested, it's called Sudden Intimacies, and it's about when you go to see the doctor, especially an emergency room doctor or a university health doctor or a family doctor. They're there to help you. They start off with what brings you to my office today, or what brings you to the emergency room, and you tell them something that turns out to be your chief complaint. And then they build on that with an exam, and they start out asking you when it started and how it affects you and so forth. And then they get to the point where at some point in time, they ask you to undress, and they examine you and hurt you and do bad things to you. And throughout those experiences of being involved in people's lives to that degree of intimacy, I became aware that it was a challenge to become that close to people that quickly. And I developed a way to talk to them and put them at ease and pass the time while I was hurting them and torturing them and putting them through various contortions.
So I'm going to bring up a couple things from the book, but also let's because when I was reading that and some of the stories, you talk about your college experience and you talk about how you were driven.
Yes.
Like that was my impression. Reading that book, you're a driven individual. So I want to ask.
Well, I am now. Kathy has to drive.
It's true. It's true. And the fact that you guys went to Greece afterwards,
yes,
and, or Rome, and
Rome,
anyways,
yeah.
We'll talk about that too. But for those that, anyways, to catch up, obviously, so Doc has had years of therapy going on, and he's retiring here in St. George, but he still gets back to Logan. You've got tons of grandkids coming and going. We actually were trying to get a hold of this earlier, but he had grandkids, and they're staying busy.
Yes, we're
staying very busy.
Yeah.
Where did you? So for the undergrads, because they have never met you.
Mm-hmm.
We have 70. Last I checked, 71 brothers,
mm-hmm.
and they don't. They hear about Doc Davis. They hear legends, but they don't know Doc Davis. So give us where did you grow up? A brief synopsis of where did you grow up?
Okay.
School you went to. When did you decide to become a doctor?
Okay. I knew what I wanted to be from a very young age. I had an older brother who was a chemist, and I knew one of the things I wanted to do was to be a scientist, and I wanted to be a chemist and teach chemistry or be involved in the industry of chemistry somehow. And so I specifically chose a college when I went to college that was a smaller college because I grew up in a small town in southeastern Iowa called Washington, Iowa. And about 100 miles away was a college called Monmouth College, which was a small college. And I went to Monmouth College to be a chemistry major and was in chemistry class, working on my major and enjoying it. And I went into class one day, and my chemistry professor, it was in analytical chemistry, and he stood up in class that day, and he had a copy of Life magazine, and he flipped it open, and he says, "Look at this, guys. How many of you are chemistry majors?" And several of us raised their hands, and it was a class of about 30 students. And he says, "Well, read it and weep. There are no jobs in chemistry." And I said, "What?" So I went up after class and looked at the magazine, and it was a copy of Life magazine. And on the back page of Life magazine, every week, there was a photo essay, and it was called Parting Shots. And Parting Shots was its characteristic was it was a very brief story describing a photograph that had been taken, and it was something unique. Well, the quote of this photograph was, "Doesn't anybody need a PhD chemist?" And this was a picture of a chemist standing in an organic lab. Obviously, it was an organic lab because of the equipment that was there. And he was in his white coat, and he said, "Doesn't anybody need a PhD chemist?" The story was that he was graduating with his PhD degree in chemistry, and he was unable to find work. And if you look very carefully at the article, he was graduating from a place that became near and dear to my heart. He was graduating from Utah State University with a PhD in chemistry. I didn't know it at the time. I'd never heard of Utah State University. I'd never thought of myself working at Utah State University or taking care of students who work at Utah State University. It was totally one of those things that once in a while, some power allows you to see into the future and see what the future can be for you. And this was an amazing story that I discovered later, that student was a PhD student from Utah State University. And I discovered that when I later on, many years later, when I was a physician working in Tremonton, my first practice. And I said to the nurses, because one of the nurses was getting ready to go on a mission for the LDS Church, and she was going to go to Chicago. And I said, well, her husband, who taught chemistry at the high school, I said, "Who's going to teach classes while you're gone?" And she said, "I don't know. Do you want to?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I always wanted to be a chemistry teacher." And another nurse stood there and said, "What made you change your job?" And I said, "Well, I decided to become a doctor because there were no jobs in chemistry, nothing available in chemistry." It was back in the 70s. It was a time when there was a cutback in the industry, and they were not hiring any chemists anywhere, nothing in the industry, nothing in research and development, nothing in education. And so based on that, I said, I guess I got to talk to my girlfriend and see what I should do. So based on that story, I went home that day and talked to my girlfriend, who's now my wife, Kathy, and said, "What do you think I should do?" She said, "Well, all your friends are pre-med. Your dad always wanted you to be a doctor. Maybe you should think about being pre-med." And I said, "Well, let's try that." So I decided to switch schools, transferred to the University of Iowa, became pre-med, left Monmouth College, and went to the University of Iowa, where I graduated in undergrad with a major in basic science and a minor in chemistry, and then went on to medical school at the University of Iowa and graduated, and then went to my residency at McKay-Dee Hospital in Ogden, and that's what brought me to Utah. And then I took my first job in Tremonton, and that's where I ran across the nurse who described the fact that her husband had been my patient 2 weeks before. I'd held his ankle in my foot, and he was the reason that I had gone to the University of Iowa in medicine, pre-medicine, rather than staying in chemistry. And so that's kind of a short synopsis of my travel, my medicine trip. While I was at Monmouth College, for social life, about 80% of the young men at Monmouth College joined fraternities. And so I was invited to join Sigma Phi Epsilon. And I didn't know anybody. I wasn't a member, or I didn't have any relatives that were members. But my sister at Iowa Wesleyan College was dating a SIGEP. And so I went to check out the SIGEPs, and I liked him. And they had a guy whose name was Terry Hunter, who was the house Mother Hunter, we called him. And he was a chemist. And so I kind of said, well, I'm a chemist. He's a chemist. I guess I fit with these guys. And so it was important for me to kind of feel fitting in and become social. And so SIGEP answered my questions about sociality. And so I had a lot of fun experiences at Monmouth College and SIGEP.
Yeah. So Utah State SIGEP, obviously different culture,
yes,
based off of fraternities and especially now with the Balanced Men program.
Yes.
Would you be so gracious to share with us some of those, just couple memories of the SIGEPs from your university experience?
From my university? Well, first of all, it was a college. It was a four-year college. Yeah. It was a four-year college, so it wasn't a university. And my experiences there, we had a lot of fun. It was a very social group, and we had a lot of experiences. I don't want to give you any ideas because some of the experiences weren't all that wholesome. And for instance, when I had a girlfriend and I was dating her very seriously, and I knew I was going to marry her, and she was the one for me. And so we got what was called lavaliered, which means I got her a necklace with the letters Sigma Phi Epsilon on it. It was a lavalier, and you could order them through the SIGEP catalog and purchase them. And so I got her a lavalier. Well, the brothers took issue with that and said, well, we're not going to lose you as a brother, so we're going to hang you upside down from the football goalpost, and let the college dogs come and lick your face. And they also put me in a shopping cart and wheeled me down to the bottom of the hill where there was a big pond. It was a very stagnant pond, and they threw me in with my clothes on. And so that was one of the initiation things they did to me. But there were a lot of fun. We did a lot of things. They had something that they called a walkout. And a walkout was basically a tradition in the Midwest where members of an organization would walk out on the other members of the organization and kind of do their own thing. It was a day off from the organization. So at SIGEP, we had a walkout, and we went to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I went to a SIGEP chapter there in Minneapolis and visited there. And so we kind of did this walkout and field trip to an adjacent university. Because remember, I was in Monmouth, Illinois, and we ended up going to Minneapolis, and we had a lot of fun. We were growing as brothers. We took all the one thing I would tell you that we did that I can mention is that we took all the silverware from the house when we left, and so they couldn't eat while we were gone, so that was one of the pranks we did. We also had, because we had a Hell Week, it was back when hazing was allowed. And so our fraternity brothers would haze us. And hazing is a two-edged sword. Yes, there were people who were hurt by it. I was never personally hurt by it, or because I was a football player. I went to Monmouth College partly because they offered me a football scholarship, and partly because I wanted an ACS chemistry rating on my college, and they offered both. So I was playing football, and I was in good shape, and so we had to do lots and lots of push-ups, lots and lots of sit-ups. I remember one of the fraternity brothers had moved off campus, and so he came up and he says, "Who am I?" And he didn't think I would recognize him, and I said, "I know who you are, and this is your name." And he said, "You're right." And he said, "Where do I live?" I said, "You live down by the railroad tracks." And he screamed at me, "Do you think it's funny that I live down by the railroad tracks? That train comes by every morning and wakes me up. This is not funny. Get down and give me 20. And so I was doing push-ups and push-ups and push-ups for probably most of an hour. But I was in good shape and could handle it. But we did do the hazing thing. But we had a Hell Week. And during the Hell Week, we did such mundane tasks as clean the bathroom, but we cleaned the bathroom shower with a toothbrush. I had to clean every grout line in the shower with a toothbrush. I don't remember whose toothbrush we used, but that person wasn't very happy when he found out we'd used his toothbrush. We also snuck out of the fraternity when I was a 3-story fraternity house building, and I was out on the 3rd floor, and we were going to shinny down the water pipe, the downspout, to the ground, and I was going to go over and visit my girlfriend. Why else? It was Hell Week. We couldn't talk to girls. We couldn't talk to anybody. But I decided to break out with one of my fraternity brothers named Bruce Paul. Bruce and I snuck out, and I remember walking by back against the brick wall, walking very carefully on the 3rd story balcony, and it was about 6 inches of balcony. It was only a ledge about 6 inches wide, but we made it over and made it down and got down off the roof and went over and visited our girlfriends, and then came back and snuck back in the same way. But there were those kinds of shenanigans that it was basically some physical challenge, but there was also a lot of fun and a lot of camaraderie, a lot of making friends and getting acquainted with people. I remember the person who I looked up to the most was a guy who was a chemistry major. His nickname was Wags, and his name was Wagner. His last name was Wagner. And Wags was my big brother, and he was the one that got me through Hell Week and got me into basically into the fraternity and kept me in good graces with the other people. Kind of told me when I was doing the wrong thing and let me know when I was doing the right thing and let me know what it took to be successful as a SIGAP. And I think one of the programs that I'd like to see is the fact that we still have big brothers and we still have people who kind of lead you in the proper way to learn about fraternities and learn about the positives of fraternities. I should tell a disclosure. There's one thing I should say. I'm embarrassed by this, and I apologize to those of you who are LDS, but I wasn't always a good LDS person. And I picked up a bad habit of drinking at college. And so you're sitting in the presence of the chug champion of Monmouth College. And at SIGEP parties, they were known to lift a drink or two. And I had the record, the chug champion of Monmouth College. And I had the record of I hope this doesn't make any of you feel less of me because I've come a long way from there. But I drank 16 ounces in 2.3 seconds. And that record, the last time I saw, was still posted on the Sigma Phi Epsilon wall as the record, the local record. Now I've come clean. I told it all.
Yeah, that's one you've never mentioned before.
Yeah.
That's funny.
No, I don't tell many people about that.
Okay. We might have to censor this one.
Yeah.
Well, good thing you're retired.
Yes,
and
yes.
you have nobody to report to other than Kathy.
No,
and
she knew.
you.
She that poor lady tucked me in more nights than I can remember. Walked me back to my dorm and saw that I got in safely.
So basically, she was doing what she's doing now.
Yes,
back then in
but I couldn't stand up for a different reason now.
Oh, yeah, she is a saint. So that was your time there.
Yes.
You ended up, you briefed on how you ended up in Cache County.
Yes.
So you're there in Franklin? No, Preston.
Providence.
Sorry, you're in Providence. You ended up getting in with the university as well.
Yes.
At what time did you get approached as far as SIGEP and the recolonization?
I knew that SIGEP existed, and I knew that SIGEP had a chapter at Utah State University.
Oh, because you would have been there prior.
I was there prior, and I knew the previous chapter advisor, and he was a wonderful guy, and he was a highway patrolman, and I knew him because I worked in the emergency room, and I saw him come through the emergency room with patients once in a while and come in to do accident follow-ups and so forth. So I knew who he was, and his wife was actually a emergency room nurse and later became one of the head nurses in the hospital. And so I worked with his wife and I worked with him, and he invited me once to a chapter meeting at SIGEP, and I think he was kind of recruiting me to kind of helping with the advising. And it was a pretty rowdy group, and by that time I'd given up long ago. I'd stopped drinking, and there's still alcohol use at the chapter, and so I was kind of uncomfortable with it, and I expressed my discomfort with it, and I said, I don't know that I want, because I had small children, and I said, I don't know if I want my small children to be exposed to this element of this. And I said, it's just not for me. This is not the lifestyle that I want to live.
Was this in the 80s or
It was in the 80s. It was in the 80s. It was before they lost their charter. And so I went to that one meeting and that one meeting only, and I thought, I'm just not interested. Flash forward a little more, they lost their charter, and they were off campus and disbanded and gone, and the house was sold. And the house was sold to the university, And they put another chapter of another fraternity in that chapter. And that was the way it was. And then I stopped working in the emergency room and started working for the university. And I was the director of the Student Health Center. And they also made me in charge of the Student Wellness Center, which means I was responsible for any alcohol abuse or drug abuse or health problems, in addition to working with sports teams and general medical care. So I was kind of responsible for that. And I thought, well, that was a good decision that I got away from the alcohol and got away from the fraternities. Then I learned that SIGEP was talking about opening a chapter on campus again, that they were sending some people from National SIGEP to look at the possibility of reopening a chapter. And they called me and said, would you be at all interested in meeting with us? And I talked to them at that meeting. I said, yeah, I'll meet with you. But I talked to them at that meeting and I said, I have given up alcohol. It's a different part of my life now. I don't use alcohol anymore. And they said, well, actually, we have what's called a Balance Man program. And we don't, we don't misuse alcohol. And I said, if you can teach me about the Balance Man program, and I find you're telling me the truth, that you don't abuse or tolerate abuse of alcohol, then I guess I'd be interested. I would be interested in reopening those attachments, because it had been 30 years since I'd been in Sigma Phi Epsilon. It had been 30 years since I'd been through a chapter meeting. It had been 30 years since I'd been through any kind of procedures with regards to the programming of SIGEP. And I said, well, I'd be willing to sit down with you and talk with you about it anyway. And fast forward, we had the meeting. I found them to be truthful. I found them to be right. I was impressed by the Balance Man program. I was impressed by the steps SIGEP had taken, by the steps they were willing to take to return back to Utah State's campus. And I took them at their face value and said, this is for me. I guess I could be involved in this. And they made me their initial advisor.
I'm going to say this chapter would not exist if it wasn't for you. I don't know a single person, and I'm sure there were other SIGEPs in Cache Valley. Mm-hmm. We know that, but I honestly, I don't think there's a single person that could have been a better advisor. And
I really appreciate that, Oz.
You have those that watch, those that I'm, that original colonization and then some. The single commonality is you, in the sense of what you stood for, what you professed, how you guided us. Mm-hmm. We were young. We're in college. That's fraternities are a brotherhood, and you look to the big brother and the little brothers, right?
Yes.
And at that point, you were the only big brother. Yeah. You were one guiding 20 that were just kind of figuring it out. Yeah. And man, you put in so much amazing input. So a good thing there's Kleenex right here. So I am truly grateful, as well as I know anybody that watches this that knows you would back me up 100% for that.
Well, they'll be a little disheartened that I was a chug champion at Monmouth College, but I apologize for that to whoever is offended by that. But it was the 70s, and it was
a different time.
It was the Midwest, and it was the norm. It was the way that I'd grown up, and it
was fraternities back then.
It was fraternity.
It was. Yeah. And I think that's the same as for me. I lived with 4 Pikes. I knew some Sigma Chi's. Mm-hmm. I rushed Pike. Well, during rush week, they got me. I've been bid and with the Pikes and the Sigma Chi's. I knew the guys very well, but it was the alcohol thing kept me away, mm-hmm. as well as like the guys that lived out of the house were the best guys. The ones that lived in the house were living that fraternity lifestyle, and that was just something I wasn't interested in. And so SIGEP came around, and that I was the same. Show me why you're different. You say you're different. Show me.
Yes.
Prove it to me.
Yes.
And yeah, we've done that. And so, it's it's interesting how your career kind of put you at Utah State. And like I said, I can't think of anybody else that could take that position and do with it what you did. So let's reminisce a little bit about those first few years.
Okay.
So I've asked all those that I've interviewed, I've asked like, what is like a couple key moments? Could be fun, could be silly, could be emotion, like deep. Share with us like a couple key moments.
Okay.
And I'm hitting you on the spot. So.
Yeah. Well, and this is totally off the cuff, but one of the key moments I remember was the first night we met as a group. We had prospective members. We had we'd not chosen a president. We were working with individuals from National, and there were people who'd come to organize a colony of prospective SIGEPs, and they did an interesting thing. They talked to not the men on campus, but the women on campus, and said, who are the outstanding young men on this campus? We want them in a different social group that doesn't exist right now, and we want to create a new social group. And we want that to be a Sigma Phi Epsilon chapter and to grow from a colony into a chapter. And so we want to recruit only the best young men that we can. And those early members and subsequent members have maintained that standard of being the best of the best that Utah State has to offer. And I was impressed by that. And I was impressed by the young men that were choosing SIGEP and were accepting SIGEP and being willing to develop from the start, from a dead start with no organization whatsoever, to start a new program of a balanced man working towards a balanced man chapter and to become balanced men themselves. And that impressed me. So I'm with this very impressive group of young men, and they were the best of the best. They were in Utah State's student body leadership. They were leaders on campus. They were leaders within their colleges. They were leaders within student services, and they were well-known young men. And it was very easy to accept them. And I used to make a joke about, you've joined SIGEP because you're bringing something to SIGEP. We're going to try to develop a chapter that can bring something to you. We're tired of you giving all your abilities to Sigma Phi Epsilon. We want SIGEP to give something back to you and to make sure that it's a program and an organization that you can benefit from, as well as giving benefit to. And that's basically what we started working on. But one of the first things we did is we had a chapter meeting, and we had people who'd pledged, who'd agreed to join, and they went through an initiation ceremony. And we got to the end of the initiation ceremony, and I thought back to my own initiation, and I thought back to what was important to me about that. And I remember the camaraderie and the things that we did. And I remember we had to develop traditions. And we had no traditions. We had no traditions of Sigma Phi Epsilon. I knew that traditions existed in SIGEP, and I knew that the national organization had traditions, but we didn't have any local knowledge of traditions. Obviously, the two advisors that had come and helped us set up the chapter were knowledgeable. But we got through the initiation ceremony, and then one of the initiation things I remembered was that SIGEP had a tradition of circling up in a circle and singing the anthem, the song, Dear Old Fraternity, all my life through. And that's all I could remember. And so they said, Doc Davis, will you lead us in the anthem? And I went, oh, I don't remember it. It had been 30 years. And I froze, and I thought, well, I guess I'll start and I'll just hope things work out okay. But I remembered it. It came right back to me, and I remembered it, and it all worked out well. And to this day, I'm not sure anybody knew that I faltered on the anthem that date. But it all worked smooth, and I never forgot it ever again. And but that was one of the memories I remember, is that that first meeting. And then we had meetings, an organization meeting. And I remember our first president was selected on our living room couch. I remember lots of people who were members at that time. I remember, and I'm going to forget some people, so I'm almost reticent to mention names, but I remember Woody, and was the first president, and I remember Tag at one of the first meetings, and I remember so many members who sat on our couch and developed bylaws and developed.
You keep talking. I have a picture.
Developed bylaws and developed rules and developed plans and developed committees and developed jobs. And we sat and talked about who would fit this job and who would fit that job, who's going to be the first of this and who's going to be the first of that. And I remember all of those people. And it was such a fun time to be organized and to be on the planning of a new fraternity, of a new chapter of Sigma Phi Epsilon under the Balanced Man program.
So this picture isn't of that. I had more poker games.
Oh, yes.
Very first couple weeks.
Yes.
Those are the pictures that I have.
We traveled on poker games.
But this one, I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
This one is more of just the hangouts. We would do constant hangouts over at your house.
Yes.
Countless. We'd watch games. Lots of hours spent downstairs.
Yep.
Kathy would put together an amazing spread. And then let me see if I could bring up one. Next one. Hold on. Then we graduated to this place. No. That's the office of the Health and Wellness
Oh,
Center.
the Health and Wellness Center, yes. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, my eyesight isn't.
Oh, yeah, I should. So that is the memory for a lot of us. Those first 4 years we were in the Health and Wellness Center. We'd all have the tables. We'd have to throw down tables, line up chairs. Mm-hmm. I was just talking with Kevin Liu, the last guy, and he said, he would always come right after gym class.
Yes,
and just come right.
He was coming from track, I think. Yeah, from track.
And we got to a point where we packed that office in the back room.
Yes.
And so.
And we did ritual there too.
We've done rituals there. We did a lot. That office space played a huge role as far as keeping us with a home, you know, in that aspect. Because at that time, we lived. There were very few of us that were actually roommates. Mm-hmm. And then over the next couple of years, we started congregating and finding houses that we can put together. And we had the duplex, and we had a bunch of brothers there, and then we had one up the street. And that was kind of, we started finding more social homes.
Yes.
We'd have our meetings still there. But
the sociality was always a part of it. It was always an important part of it. Mm-hmm. But the thing that amazed me, Oz, is that you guys got together outside of the student center. You got together outside of the natural fraternity. You got together for programming. You got together for projects. You got together for fundraisers. You got together for races, for
the
triathlons, and it was always a wonderful thing to be a part of that, and to, God, I never ever had to organize those things. You guys were always so organized, and because you were natural born leaders, you had been leaders, and the SIGEP made a wise decision to select you from the leadership of the campus because you're already proven leaders, and you had the ability within yourselves to start that off and to complete it.
Well, I guess that was for us. Sports was always a big thing. We wanted those front rows. Yes. We wanted to surround it.
Yes.
And so it's good to see every time I still watch it on ESPN or I watch a game on TV to see the flag.
Yes.
And so undergrads, keep up the good work on that.
I should let you undergrads know that one of the things I can do from St. George is watch Aggie games. And so I do that regularly, watching Aggie games, and I watch for the flag. And I look for you guys every time and amazed to see that you're still active in that area.
I think it's important. It's that school spirit.
Right? Well, it's what college is all about. It's what I remember about college.
Yeah. If it wasn't for those outside, SIGEP created a foundation, but you're right. It was a lot of other activities around it, around the university that kind of kept us building upon this brotherhood.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And we had similar things. We had flag football teams. I had two of my fraternity brothers were on the college football team with me, and so we had that kind of camaraderie and that kind of inside knowledge about one another. But other than that, we had flag football, we had flag basketball or basketball, and we had a track team. But the big event at Monmouth College was the annual homecoming parade. And we had something that had never been had before, and it still to this day, more than 40 years later, still exists at Monmouth College. And that's the SIGEP Memorial Kazoo Band. And I remember being on the float, humming the kazoo to various SIGEP songs, and we would ride the float and have a float every year at the Monmouth College homecoming with SIGEP. And now they're the marching kazoo band. They've gotten off the float and they actually march in the parade, and they're an annual event at the SIGEP marching kazoo band.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. There you go. So there's some talk about traditions. We've done a few, but that could be something we want to incorporate.
When I went to Quest to Greece, one of the SIGEPs was from Monmouth and knew of Monmouth College, obviously, but he had pledged a fraternity at another institution in Iowa. And so he was not from Monmouth College, Illinois Gamma, like I was, but he was from the city of Monmouth itself. And he told me that SIGEP Kazoo Band is still an event annually at that homecoming parade.
Oh, fantastic. So what? Give us another memory
of
just your time with us.
SIGEP's at Utah State.
Yeah. What was obviously I could bring up, and we've had other brothers bring up the astronomy nights.
Yes. Oh yeah.
You
we used to have star parties in our backyard, and we would have. I had developed an interest during my days at University of Iowa. I took astronomy class from James A. Van Allen, the discoverer of the Van Allen belts, and he taught an introductory class in astronomy. And I went up on the campus and learned astronomy and did projects and those kinds of things at the astronomy lab. And I developed a lifelong interest in astronomy. And I swore that if I ever got dark skies and enough money ahead, that I was going to purchase and own a telescope. Well, fast forward, I ended up in Logan and Providence. And by golly, the skies were dark. And so I bought my first telescope. I later bought 7 more. And we would take some of the telescopes out and set them up and have a star party. We would talk about time and the relationship with time and distance and the stars and the movement. And we start talking about the elements of time, the day, the minute, the hour, the second. And those were all astronomically derived. And then we'd start talking about other things related to astronomy. And then by that time, it was usually getting dark. And the guys were starting to snuggle with their dates. And so we'd turn our eyes to the sky and we'd look at the sky and we'd learn the elements of the sky and the parts of the sky, whatever was up that night and whatever was up at that time. And we'd talk about, everybody would gasp when I'd pull out the laser pointer and they could look at this bright green light that would point at the stars and you could see individual points of light pointed out by the laser pointer. So I remember those star parties, and we had one of them up on campus. And we had several of them in my backyard. And I don't know how much smoochy kissing went on. I did never look around to see that, but I presume there was probably some of that. So it was a good icebreaker for the brothers to have dates.
It was. I do remember that. It was like, oh, we're going to do a star party at Doc's. Who you bringing?
Yeah.
So it was like you just don't go by yourself, even though it's a brotherhood activity. It was always like, well, who are you going to bring? Because it's dark. Gets a little cold when it gets dark.
Yeah,
you got
absolutely.
And when you're staring,
you
at
want to be
stars,
safe. You want to be safe. You don't want to freeze. Yeah,
you gotta show a girl the stars.
Exactly.
That's the perfect entrance for it.
Well, I know, but I was glad to teach the guys to look at heavenly bodies. It was part of my intent.
Touche. That's good. Well, so you were instrumental in a lot of different things. A lot of activities happened, were hosted by you. You pitched in. Kathy pitched in and helped
she
out
did.
a lot.
She was wonderful.
She was She was our formal, informal. We didn't have a house in those early years,
Right.
and so we didn't ever have a house mom. But she got adopted real quick, and she took care of us whenever we'd come over there. I remember she was always bringing food down.
Well,
for
she
us.
knew all of you, and she knew all of you by name, and she still knows you all by name. She still remembers the names, because I have some names that are from hockey, and some names are from SIGEP, and she can tell the difference, and she knows you and knows each of you, and has memories of each of you. So she's been a good partner along the way.
So that's going back to your book. So if you have the opportunity, I will put the link to Amazon, and I'll put it in the description down below so you can find that. But I was fascinated. You did from the time you mentioned this here today, but like you had this drive. You knew what you wanted to be, and
Yes.
you kind of wanted to excel and move as fast as you
I
could.
knew the unfortunate thing is that I knew what I wanted to be, and that was I wanted to be a chemistry teacher. But then I knew that I wanted to be a physician, but I always had a tendency to work in ERs and work in emergency medicine. But I did my residency in family medicine, and so I was trained generally. And then I went back because I knew what I really wanted to do, and I really wanted to be an emergency room doctor, and I wanted to be a correct, proper, trained emergency room doctor. And because I'd already finished my residency in family medicine, I didn't take a residency in emergency medicine, but I took the boards in emergency medicine. So I studied and I qualified myself as a board certified emergency physician, as well as a board certified family doctor, family physician. And I was very proud of that. I was the first board certified family physician to go to emergency medicine. And I was the first board certified emergency medicine physician in Cache Valley. And I because I wanted by all means to be properly trained and capable, because my one fear was that I get to an emergency situation and panic and not know what to do. And thankfully that never happened because I was always well trained. So one of the things I'd want to leave is the message that whatever you do, whatever you choose to do it the very best you can, and do it to all your ability. Study hard, study diligently, be honest and truthful, and always, above all, maintain your standards of Sigma Phi Epsilon, because you're taught to be virtuous, diligent, and to have brotherly love for your other brothers. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit, but I want to make sure that you understand the importance of those principles that SIGEP teaches you: to be virtuous, to be diligent, and to be capable of brotherly love. And as we looked for members and we looked at members, I found that you were capable of all three. And so, we in fact, there was a time, Oz, when I personally felt like I had to give people a reason. I had to think about, why did I join SIGEP? And why should I convince young men who are at Utah State University, why should I teach them that SIGEP is better than what they have? Because most of the young brothers that were joining SIGEP,
the church,
were members of the church or active members of the church. And so I thought to myself, well, look, SIGEP brings you a regular meeting. Well, people in the LDS church have regular meetings, lots and lots and lots of regular meetings. People in the church are honest. People in SIGEP are honest. People in SIGEP are diligent. People in the church are diligent. So what does the Sigma Phi Epsilon fraternity have to offer to a Latter-day Saint, particularly returned missionary in the college age group? And I thought, what can we offer them? And so I came up with three things that we could offer them. We could offer them the program of the balanced man, because so many young people become unbalanced. They become physically exercising, but not mentally exercising, or they lose track of what's important, or they get waylaid by drugs or alcohol or other kinds of things, and they lose important principles.
Well, and I'm going to add on to that if I can.
Okay.
That even now more than ever, so like technology has taken away from that interaction. And I think that's a fraternity
Yes.
forces
Especially the sociality of it.
yeah,
They lose the
forces
sociality of
you
it.
to get out of your shell. And we do. We tend to find ourselves hiding and doing this. Literally today, my sister said, my college age kids, they text me. They don't call me. They text me.
Right.
Nobody has conversation. So I think a fraternity, and big part of it is that forced conversation.
Yes.
That forced interaction.
Now, the next thing that I thought that we could teach is we could teach leadership. Well, come on. The LDS Church teaches you leadership. In fact, a lot of young people that we were recruiting, actively recruiting, were already active in their elders quorum. They had jobs and positions in the Mormon Church or the LDS Church. For one thing, it gives you a job. It gives you a place to be on Sunday and makes you feel responsible for someone and something other than yourself. And that's a good thing. But it's an ecclesiastical authority. It's an ecclesiastical based job that you have. And what you need is based outside the church in authority and position, because everybody who works in the LDS Church does so under threat of eternal damnation. And SIGEPs,
I shouldn't laugh.
yes, SIGEPs teach you a different kind of leadership. It teaches you more civilian leadership. It teaches you how to lead people when they don't want to do what you want to do. If you tell somebody in the LDS Church that you want to have a meeting, okay, yes, sir, yes, Bishop, yes, brother, we'll do that because I don't want to go to hell. But with SIGEPs, you have to do it because you want to do it, and you have to develop leadership skills that persuade other people to do what you ask them to do, simply for the fact that you're asking because it's the right thing to do. So you're learning to do things for the right reasons, not just because God says it's what you're supposed to do. So the second thing I thought we could offer people who are not LDS or not SIGEPs is we could offer them true leadership, responsibility, and developing stress inoculations of developing levels of stress that would allow you to grow as an individual. And stress inoculations are what pilots use to learn to pilot a plane. Stress inoculations are what the Army uses to learn to fight. And they put you in stressful situations and expect you to fight your way out of it and to fly your way out of it. And so SIGEP gives you leadership responsibility, starting off early and starting off young, to develop to the point where you become a chapter president or some other position in the chapter, or you go on the quest to Greece and you learn other responsibility positions, or you develop the ability to lead
Outside of the fraternity.
outside of the fraternity and outside of the
president.
church.
We-
Outside of the church,
Yeah, I just heard the chapter, they just had ASUSU elections, and the new campus president or student body president is a SIGEP. So
Wonderful.
it's that you get out of your shell and you build that leadership and those qualities.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so those are two things that I came up with that we could teach. And so that became the alternative to having weekly meetings at church and having the priesthood and having the authority and all of the things that you learn as a Latter-day Saint. But I adopted those so that they were relevant to non-LDS people as well as to LDS people.
Yeah. And honestly, it's crucial. I think it's crucial even for those Latter-day Saints to learn
Yes.
outside. I know it was very LDS heavy when we first started, but there were a couple that weren't members. And I think that was crucial for us to work on polishing. I think
Yes.
any return missionary, and I'm sorry, I'm getting into the weeds a little bit here, but any return missionary, they're not polished. They're kind of rigid
Yes.
in their interaction. They're rigid in their mannerisms.
Well, I've never talked to the national chapter about this, but one of the biggest struggles we had, that I personally had, the biggest struggle I had was convincing those young men in those first few groups of SIGEPs that they were going to go through an initiation, but that no part of the initiation, nothing that they were going to agree to during initiation was going to be opposing or opposite to their beliefs or their already made commitments to their Heavenly Father, to their church, to their future spouse, or to their family. And yet, because we were asking them to take upon themselves a new commitment, a new undertaking, And the question it came up multiple times. Is this going to interfere with my taking the sacrament? Is this going to interfere with my practicing the priesthood or going to the temple? Or is this going to interfere? And the answer is absolutely not. It doesn't interfere with anything. In fact, it develops. It builds upon, yeah. And one of the things I learned in my quest to Greece was my trip to Greece is I learned that the Ephesians, there's a little town outside of Athens, and the pilgrimage used to occur there in ancient times. And there was a temple there, one of the Greek temples. And it was a temple ceremony. And I thought, I'm going to watch this temple ceremony to see if there's anything to it. What's it all about? And they did things like they do in the temple. And it was amazingly similar. And that made me feel at ease knowing that what you know church-wise has been around a long, long time. And what you know SIGEP-wise is faithful and true to that original plan. And there's nothing in it that is in opposition to anything that you already believe.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. So that was obviously undergrads. I kind of do this hoping undergrads will chime in and listen to get the sage of wisdom from other alumni and hopefully learn. We want to build up that network.
Which reminds me, there were 3 parts of that plan. I said there were 3.
You said 2.
The
hey,
3.
I felt good enough with 2, but go ahead.
The third plank of that plan was networking. The church doesn't offer you good networking because you can't network outside the church. And at least
the bubbles.
It's very difficult, yeah. But but you develop a Sigma Phi Epsilon, a national network that's available to you. I know people who got jobs because they belonged to a fraternity. I know people who got jobs because they were SIGEP and belonged to the SIGEP fraternity. And I know people who were selected simply because they were Greek and they got jobs and positions and wealth and entertainment and enjoyment because their quality of life because they were part of a Greek fraternity and Sigma Phi Epsilon. So that was the third plank. I mentioned there were 3, but I forgot the third.
Hey, we'll forgive you, you know? So I don't want to take up any more of your time, and you've talked to the undergrads, but I do want to have one last question for you. And this is how I send off every episode is it's been 15, maybe 20 years since you've seen some of our chapter, from the original 2003 or 2004. What would you like to say to them?
Oh, contact me.
Come to St. George.
I would love to hear from you. My email address, and Kathy reads my emails because I can no longer read them, but Kathy reads my emails every day to me, and I go through them.
Even the spam?
I weed out the spam, but she reads it. And so I used to be the team doctor for the hockey team. So my email address is hkydrd, hockey doctor D, @gmail.com. And I would love to hear from any of you who'd be willing to write and tell me how you're doing, tell me how your family's doing, and tell me what's become of you since I lost track of you. Because that's the one regret I have is that I wasn't able to keep up with the fraternity when I'm lying in the ICU, and I had to kind of turn the reins over. But I would love to hear from any of you who want to talk to me or write me and let me know how you're doing. I know some of you are around. I know there are some of you as close as St. George. Some of you are as close as Las Vegas. Some of you are as close as Logan. And I would love to hear from any of you who are those places or any other places. Because one of the things I try to do is I try to find things to do. And so it's nice to have breaks in the monotony of getting up every day and trying to stay alive.
But I do want to say this. He stays very busy for being someone who, lost his right side of his body, is almost blind. Yeah. What was it, a year ago, I'm talking to him. He's like, oh, do you want to see my recumbent bike? I go biking. I do about 3 miles all the time. I said, Doc, but you keep telling me you're blind.
Yeah, watch out if you're on the trails of St. George.
So sight or no sight, he's going to keep going and keep doing what he's doing.
Well, I can see a few feet ahead of me, and so I can see Kathy, and I can see her flag on her bike, and so I try to keep that in view all the time. Once in a while, I get away from her, and she has to come looking for me, but most of the time we're together, and she keeps me under pretty close wraps.
Fantastic. So if anybody is in the St. George area, hit me up. I'll bring you over here. There's a golf course in his backyard. I could turn this around and you could just golf right here from his back patio.
Well, I would love to hear or see any of you that want to stop by. And one of the things I'd like to discuss at some point in time, maybe at a future visit, are some of the things I learned at the Tragos Quest to Greece. Bill Tragos was a brother in St. Louis who made lots and lots and lots of money advertising for Apple when Apple went into Europe. And he was the major advertiser for Apple in Europe. And he retired and took his winnings and retired. And he became the sponsor for the Tragos Quest to Greece and sponsors an annual trip for the fraternity, several members, to Greece. And I was lucky enough to be invited on that trip. And so I have experiences. And you have to realize we did a ceremony up on the mountains of Greece. The other thing I did was we took time to do a star party in the mountains of Greece. And that was really an exceptional experience. First of all the astronomy had changed because we were at a different latitude. And so I had to relearn where all the stars were. But it was really interesting to see the brothers come alive, learning about time and learning about the same kinds of things I taught you at the chapter meetings when we had star parties. And so because young people have a quest for knowledge, and we learned all about Greece, I learned about the meaning of sigma, phi, and epsilon. And whether you talk HHF or whether you talk VDBL, the two are absolutely identical and have meaning, and they have meaning relevant to today's day. And I would urge you to look into the meaning of those words, to the Greek letters that are represented by sigma, phi, epsilon, and know what you stand for, and know why it's a good thing to be a Sig Ep and to have those things in your nature and in your background.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. Heard him. We might have a part 2 in the future.
Yeah.
Maybe this fall. We'll hit you back up when I get back, and then. But yeah, I wanna thank you for letting me come over.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's good to talk with you. Yeah.
We've and I'm glad I'm healthy. I'm glad you're healthy. I've had sickness. We've been trying to coordinate this for a while, so I'm glad to do this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It really is.
Love you, Doc, and all that you do for us.
I love you too, Oz. Yeah. Thank you.